Archie. Thank you, everyone. As I reflect on my life, I realize I've lived most of it shadowed by some degree of fear. The fear of being who and what I was born to be. Let me set the stage for you. I grew up in a large, tight-knit Irish Catholic family. I was a middle child, and I knew from an early age I was different. I couldn't put a finger on why I felt different, but I always felt more like I fit in, but didn't fully belong. I think that is why to this day, my favorite Christmas show is Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Like Rudolph and Herbie, I was a misfit. I finally understood why I felt that way when at 13, I was watching the evening news with my family. I was lying on the floor with my face in my hands alongside a few of my siblings when the anchor announced that the American Psychiatric Association declassified homosexuality as a mental illness. It was if all the pieces finally fell into place and I realized who and what I was, and I was thunderstruck. I know I turned beet red and was certain everyone in the family was staring at me. I was afraid to move or to look at anyone. The feeling was so visceral. I remember exactly how I felt to this day. And that's when the fear began. Now I knew who I was not something to be proud of according to society, or that I could ever tell anyone. I felt I needed to bury that side of me to make sure no one ever found out. In addition to the societal stigma, I faced additional stigma as a Catholic whose father taught religious education. We heard a lot of his lessons around the dinner table, and I specifically remember him saying that homosexuals would be denied heaven were they ever to act on their desires. I took that to mean if I wanted to get to heaven, I could never fall in love. That I would have to live my life alone. I struggled with this notion throughout my youth and wondered, why am I here at all? Why would God create a person and then deny them love? And trying to find a reason for my existence, it occurred to me that maybe being homosexual was what I heard referred to in the church as the calling to the priesthood. Well, like any good Catholic family, we had a family priest. I asked him one day, how would I know if I had the calling? He looked at me and chuckled and said, don't worry, Joe, you don't have the calling. At this point, I felt it would be better if I was never born. I never seriously considered suicide, as that was a one-way ticket to hell according to church teachings, but I did pray God would end my life for me. As I got older, I learned to live with who I am and to hide my true self out of fear of discovery and being shunned, or worse. But then while in high school, Stonewall happened. Gay and lesbian people were starting to fight back against the hate and discrimination, and I felt proud of them. I started to feel different. I gained a level of self-acceptance and self-love that made me start to look at things differently. I still didn't have the courage to come out of the closet, and I continued to hide my authentic self all through college, my early career, where I considered my sexual preference to be nobody's business. In retrospect, I see that I was living in fear of being outed. I was afraid in high school, I was afraid in college, and I was still afraid. I finally got tired of living the way I was and summoned the courage to attend a men's coming out group at Horizon Social Services in the 80s. By finally being around people like me, people who struggled with how to handle their queerness, I started losing that fear of being outed, and I began coming out to certain friends and family. Also, at that time, AIDS was exploding, and there was a lot of new activism happening, demanding action on the part of the government and medical communities. It was such an emotional time. I had friends with AIDS who were shunned by their families. They relied on their circle of friends to care for them. And then when they did die, their families would quietly bury them so as not to be shamed by their dead gay son who died of AIDS. That is, if they claimed them at all. That's when I realized they did have a calling after all. It was to fight for my rights and the rights of the new friends I had made, the queer folk. I worked on the state AIDS hotline until I got burnt out. I then ventured into working in the background for various LGBTQ plus friendly candidates on various equal rights issues. It was rewarding after years to see the tide turn and for the LGBTQ plus folks to be granted the freedoms the rest of society takes for granted. I finally lost the fear that I'd allowed into my life. I could be my authentic self everywhere, even in my current Catholic church. I walk down Halstead and see people being themselves openly and freely, and it makes me proud I was part of that change, and I'm happy to see people living openly and happy. But since 2016, we have seen the rights we have earned threatened, seriously threatened, and it scares me. The rollback of our rights is actively being worked on at both the state and federal levels. The midterm elections will be critical to whether many of our rights survive. I fear a return to the mindset in the nation that it is okay to go back to discriminating against us, that violence against us is okay again. I am afraid because I realize the hate towards us never went away, and certain powerful political factions are good with that. I fear another Matthew Shepard will die, or worse. I don't want to return to the world where young LGBTQ plus youth are forced to live in fear again. I hear the calling. It's time to get busy. It's time to fight.